overnight, China warning the United States not to, quote, play with fire when it comes to Taiwan. Tensions are rising after Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said the U.S. is committed to defending the democratic self-governed island. Beijing considers Taiwan to be part of its sovereign territory. CNN's David Culver live in Shanghai with more. This is different rhetoric than the normal back and forth or sometimes silent stares about Taiwan, David.
And John, it's not just rhetoric. At this point, it's becoming action, military action that we're starting to see in the form of exercises that the U.S. says when they're looking at how the Chinese are going forward with these naval and air exercises as being aggressive. This is happening about 500 miles off the coast from where we are here in Shanghai. And it is something that is causing tensions to rise dramatically.
In the ongoing shadow conflict between Iran and Israel, the two arch enemies have been engaged in direct and indirect hostilities for decades now. And now the landscapes of intense hostility between the West Asian countries are changing. Iran's nuclear program, with its potential to develop nuclear weapons, has been the undercurrent of this current conflict. In the year 2012, Iran's military chief of staff had declared that Iran is standing for its cause and that the cause is the full destruction of Israel. Former president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, had also pushed his wish to, quote, vanish Israel from the pages of time. In 2012, senior Iranian cleric Ayatollah Khatami emphasized that the spread of the Islamic awakening in the Middle East heralds the destruction of the Zionist regime. With this anti-Israel rhetoric, many Israelis expect an eventual attack from Iran. The rivalry that entailed alleged terrorist attacks, assassination of major military leaders.
Well, we start this hour with CNN's unprecedented access to Ukraine's president on the front lines on eastern Ukraine. Ukraine says Russia has amassed an additional 50,000 troops, most of them on Russia's western border near the Donbas region. The rest in Crimea, where 31,000 troops are already deployed. That's the most Russian troops in the area since Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, in fighting that killed 14,000 people. Well, the latest troop buildup leading to fears of another Russian invasion and an appeal from Ukraine's president for help from the United States. Well, Matthew Chance is joining me now from Kiev.
Relations between Russia and the United States are at an all-time low, while Foreign Minister Lavrov has said that the ties have hit a rock bottom. U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price has said that U.S. is looking for stable ties with Russia.
It remains true that we continue to look for a stable and predictable relationship with Russia. Just because we have these profound disagreements, just because the relationship is where it is right now, doesn't mean that there aren't going to be any areas of tactical alignment.
It all began with U.S. President Joe Biden calling Putin a killer. Biden also said the days of the U.S. rolling over to Putin are done. Russia recalled its U.S. ambassador immediately after, with Putin hitting back at Biden's comment, saying it takes one to know one. That's not the only issue between the countries. Growing Russian military buildup is emerging as a growing problem. Ukraine has accused Moscow of building up troops on its border. According to unverified social media footage, Russia
and other NATO countries of increasing their arms supplies to Ukraine and turning Ukraine into a powder keg. As NATO Secretary General told Russia to end its unjustified military buildup around Ukraine, the comments by the NATO chief came after meeting the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba in Brussels. During the meeting, the Ukraine diplomat called on NATO and the West to act quickly to prevent an escalation of violence between Ukraine and Russia. He also urged further sanctions against Moscow and more military help for Kiev. Meanwhile, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Brussels for his second trip within a span of few weeks. U.S. officials say on the agenda are Russian activities directed at Ukraine.
First, let me say we are concerned, as I've said in the past, but we've been, of course, watching it over the course of the weekend about the increasing aggression of Russian forces on the border. Secretary Blinken and Secretary Austin are in Brussels this week, meeting with their NATO partners, and we will, of course, I'm sure this will be a topic of discussion. We also remain in touch with Ukrainian officials at a range of levels, but I'm not going to get ahead of their discussions that they're having on the ground.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will also join Blinken in Brussels. The trip by the two American officials coincides with increasing tensions over Russian activities near Ukraine's eastern border, where
the Russian Foreign Ministry says Washington bears full responsibility for harming relations with Moscow. That's after the White House said it was expelling diplomatic staff and imposing a wave of new sanctions. Moscow says it has no choice but to retaliate.
Such aggressive behavior will undoubtedly meet firm resistance. A response to the sanctions will be inevitable. Washington has to understand that there will be a price for the degradation of bilateral relations, and it is the U.S. that is entirely responsible for what is happening.
A lot of developments today. The Russian Foreign Ministry then summoned the U.S. ambassador in Moscow for talks. He was told Washington sanctions will be met like for like, and was warned any attempts to discourage that would be totally inappropriate. Earlier, my colleagues Andrew Farmer and Jacqueline Vuga talked through all that's been going on.
As the Russian reaction makes clear, this latest move from the U.S. represents a sharp hit to relations between the two countries, and the measures being announced are quite extensive. They came in the form of a 5-page executive